And really, I can't blame them, because Jesus is crucified by the Romans in public outside the walls of Jerusalem. And then his body is taken in public to the tomb of a rich man named Joseph. It's wrapped tightly in long strips of linen, put on a shelf in this tomb, carved probably out of a small cave, out of rock. And then a large circular stone would be rolled in front of the opening to this tomb. And the authorities sent Roman soldiers to guard it, soldiers who knew that if anything happened to it and it were disturbed, they would pay for with their lives. So you can see why they would think that this is pretty much the beginning. But it wasn't. A man named Luke recorded an account of this story in the 24th chapter of a book that we call his gospel, and he tells why the disciples turned out to be so wrong. It's the story of a group of women who decided to visit the tomb of Jesus and came back with a report that no one else really expected. And the account begins this way. But on the first day of the week at early dawn, they went to the tomb, taking the spices they had prepared, and they found the stone rolled away from the tomb. But when they went in, they did not find the body of the Lord Jesus. While they were perplexed about this, behold, two men stood by them in dazzling apparel. And as they were frightened and bowed their faces to the ground, the men said to them, "Why do you seek the living among the dead? He is not here, but has risen. Remember how he told you while he was still in Galilee that the Son of Man must be delivered into the hands of sinful men and be crucified and on the third day rise." Now, this is not the way I would have written this account. If Jesus is truly resurrected, I would have just written what happened, but you don't find that anywhere in the Christian scriptures. There is no account of the resurrection itself. And maybe the message there is that the point isn't the mechanics of what brings a body back to life, like in some cheap horror movie or something. The point is the aftermath of that, what takes place then and what that means to us. And that aftermath is really nailed by these two men who are discovered by the women in the tomb when they say in verse number 5 this immense, momentous question, "And why do you seek the living among the dead?" And when I read that, I started thinking, well, where would you look for them exactly? Where do you go looking for the living? Well, these women, led by two Marys and a Joanna, were following the Jewish custom of the day, which was to take spices to the tomb of a person who had died and use those spices in something like what we would call embalming today. Now, in their culture, until this is done, a burial was not considered to be complete. It would be something like skipping the graveside service would be in my culture. You just wouldn't do it that way. And so at the end of the first day of his crucifixion, he's in the tomb, nothing has changed. The next day, it's the Sabbath, nothing has changed. But on the beginning of the third day, suddenly everything changes, and they're headed to the tomb to discover this. One of the other accounts records that as they're making their way to this tomb, they're debating among themselves who's going to roll away this huge circular stone, which was laid in a track so it could be rolled into and out of place once we arrive there. And I don't know this for sure, but I'm thinking maybe they're planning on asking the Roman guards to help them out. Can you imagine the irony, asking this empire for an act of compassion for the person whom they have just put to death? But when they arrive at the tomb, they find that no such negotiations are really necessary because the stone has already been rolled out of the way. But you know, a missing tomb cover doesn't really prove anything. I mean, it could just be vandals or grave robbers or something like that. I saw a documentary this week about the wreck of the Titanic deep in the North Atlantic Ocean, sinking in 1912, the great disaster of the early 20th century, and how Dr. Robert Ballard discovered the wreck in 1985 after many unsuccessful attempts to locate the ship at the bottom of the ocean. And Ballard left the ship in place thinking that the best way to memorialize the people whose lives were lost was simply to leave it there untouched on the bottom of the ocean and keep its location secret. Well, that secret lasted about 10 minutes. And people started going down and bringing things back. There are even artifacts in Branson, which is just so, that's a whole nother sermon, I think. That's so terrible. One particular firm recovered 8,000 Titanic artifacts, created a museum, went to court under the salvage law of the sea, and because they had brought things up and requested ownership, they now owned the wreck of the Titanic. Ballard is not a happy man because he doesn't view these people as archaeologists or historians or curators of the past. He views them as vandals and grave robbers. So it could be that when they found this tomb cover gone, somebody had just been there doing the same kind of thing. Or it also could be that something else has taken place. The cover is gone, they look inside, empty. But the lack of something isn't the proof of something. It could simply be that in the early dawn hours, in the state of shock and confusion they're in, they've gone to the wrong tomb. Not long ago, there was an investigation at the Arlington National Cemetery in Washington, D.C., where 300,000 people are buried, in which it was discovered that this cemetery, which still runs on pencil and paper records, no computers, had actually misplaced and misidentified the bodies of dozens of people, mostly servicemen and women, buried in this cemetery. And one Air Force colonel, retired, discovered that he had been going to visit his wife's grave for 4 years in the wrong place. It was actually the plot next door. When I read that, I thought, this is just unbelievable, and probably somebody's going to end up going to jail over this. But if that could happen now, what could have happened in ancient times? Maybe it's just, kind of the same thing. But the women are not really put off. What the women learn is that if you're going to look for the living, one of the places that you look is in the experiences that you have with living people. The missing tomb cover and the empty shelf carved into what was probably the rock sidewall of that tomb are experiences that are not 100% certain. You could contest them in different ways, but they are clues that something unexpected has happened. I asked Jan yesterday, what is a clue of my existence in your life? And you know what her first example was? Whiskers in the sink. I thought, a wedding ring, our 35th anniversary, the car you got me for my graduation. No, it's whiskers in the sink. So if Jan turns on the TV at night and there on the screen, the TiVo has frozen a scene from Terminator Salvation, she knows that I have been watching a movie. Because the whole cast of that movie hasn't been dead for 3 generations, so it's certainly not one that she would like to watch. And this is not proof positive that I live there. Someone else could have done that. An alien from Mars could have come down and put that on. It could be the FBI operating from a huge radar station in Washington, putting that image of all that TV. You can't disprove any of that, but to a reasonable person, that's kind of a clue that somebody else is in your house. And so you look for the living in experience of them, and while it may not be conclusive, it can be a pretty good reason to incline toward a certain sort of conclusion. And when the women see all of this, they are perplexed. Well, their perplexity is just about to go from confusion to terror when suddenly in this dark tomb, this is just like God, just when you're alone with your doubts, He sends you just what you need. Stooping in that dark tomb, suddenly 2 figures appear standing right beside them, both dressed like Elton John. The original language indicates that their garments are flashing like a disco ball in a cheap Las Vegas nightclub. Bam, 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 bam. While I was working on this, I started in my mind calling them the Disco Brothers. Bam, bam, bam. They're like this or something. Bam, 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 bam. And the women they're terrified. They're down on their faces and putting their foreheads to the cold rock on the bottom of that tomb. And probably, if I were in their shoes, I would have been praying that I'm not the one who replaces Jesus on that stone shelf. Because who are these guys? They're scared out of their minds. And the Disco Brothers say to them, why are you looking for the living among the dead? Don't you remember what he said? I'll tell you, the authorities remembered. Because the reason the Roman soldiers were stationed at the tomb is because Jesus' enemies knew what he had claimed would happen. Remember when you were in Galilee, up north, the home region where Jesus grew up? Remember how he used to talk about how the end would come and what it would be like? Remember he said that once he had died for the sin of the world, that he would rise again on the third day, and somehow through the shock and the fear and the panic and the confusion and the awfulness that is walking through that kind of process for anyone, something starts to come back through the mist of memory, and they recall it. Oh, yeah. We thought it was another one of those annoying parables. Oh, the mustard seed. Oh, the dragnet. Oh, the Good Samaritan. Blah, da, 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 da. When is he ever going to just say something straight up so we know what in the world he's talking about? We thought it was one of those metaphor things. And then there was the show trial and the false charges and the soldiers and all that blood. And when he cried out, "It is finished," we thought he meant it. But now we understand that just because it is finished doesn't mean that he is finished. In fact, maybe he's just starting. Luke continues the account with these words. And they remembered his words, and returning from the tomb, they told all these things to the 11 and to all the rest. Now it was Mary Magdalene and Joanna and Mary the mother of James and the other women with them who told these things to the apostles. But these words seemed to them an idle tale, and they did not believe them. But Peter rose and ran to the tomb. Stooping and looking in, he saw the linen clothes by themselves, and he went home marveling at what had happened. You can look for the living in their experiences. You can also look for the living in the words that they say to you. On half a dozen occasions that we have recorded, Jesus had said those words about his death for all of us and his conquest of death through his resurrection. He had promised this not only to his immediate followers, but also to the entire world and to anyone who would receive that by faith. And in those words, we find a claim that he's made that is then matched up with the experience that these women have and begin to suggest that maybe his followers were wrong. Maybe we shouldn't look for the living among the dead. Maybe we should look for the living among the living. The women were not believed when they went back. You know what the most tragic part of this verse is the little phrase, the 11. Remember when they were the 12? You know, this is like the Jackson 5 if Michael Jackson drops out and becomes the 4 or something like that. With Judas gone because he had betrayed Jesus, the 12 become the 11. And this word is received by the apostles and all of the others who were there in a way that can only be described as, well, whatever. In other words, the women rush in and say, "You just won't believe what we just saw. This is unreal." You know, like Justin Bieber has a new haircut or something, like that exciting. This is phenomenal. We were just at the tomb. We walked up. The Roman soldiers, they're laying around dead all over the place. The stone is rolled out. We look in. We stoop down. It's musty, dirty. We looked. The body's gone. The disco guys. Boom, 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 boom. Why do you look there? And now we just had to come back and tell you because we remembered his words. This is phenomenal. It's wow. It's finished, but he's not. Whatever. Culturally, women are not held in high estate. Neither is their testimony in these days. That's probably not helping. But I think truth be told, even if you took that off the table, this report is just too fantastic for anybody to believe. I think they're showing up like someone coming to your house with one of those UFO alien abduction stories. Oh, you won't believe what happened to me. I was driving down this road in New Hampshire. It was so dark, and suddenly this huge glowing thing came down in front of my car, and I thought it was a 7-Eleven at first. But then my wife Edna pointed out, no, 7-Elevens don't have laser guns hanging off them. And then we woke up, and the clock in the car dashboard said it was 6 hours later, and we don't know what happened to those 6 hours, except now I have dreams every night about aliens that look like the ones in Independence Day, doing experiments on my eyeballs with electric toothbrushes. Really, it happened just like that! Well, I don't think it's any wonder that the phrase idle tale in the original language is used by doctors to refer to the ravings of a delirious patient. Oh, that's probably just how the report of the women sounded to the ears of these sexist, skeptical men, all of whom were hiding, by the way, while the women were at the tomb checking out what was going on. Except the worst of them, Peter. Peter the smelly fisherman, Peter the come with me and I'll make you a fisher of men, Peter the, oh Lord, I will die with you. If you're going to be martyred, I'm going to be martyred. I'm going to go all the way. I'm in this right to the firewall, right to the max. Usually when you hear somebody talk like that, it's not a well thought out position. Jesus predicted, actually what's going to happen is you're going to deny me 3 times, and he did. He receives this report from a pit that I don't really have words for it, but it's got to be some kind of admixture of overwhelming guilt, despair, and the terror that all of them are going to pay with their lives soon, just the way Jesus did, because the empire has not changed its mind about this uprising, even though it's spiritual rather than political. But when the word comes from these women, something ignites in this guy. So you can look for the living in Revelation as well. And Peter is not simply stirred to dialogue with them. He gets up and he bolts out of the room, runs down whatever road or trail he was following, goes to the same tomb, sees the same cover rolled out of the way, the same Roman soldiers laid out like dead men, another account says, stoops down to get down into the tomb in that gloom, and all he sees is not the body of Jesus, but the grave clothes he used to be wrapped in, because the living don't have need of grave clothes anymore. And he marvels. The fire of revelation, that knowledge that comes from God directly that we have no control over, the fire of revelation melts experience and words into an alloy called faith. And that kind of faith is how we access everything that Jesus has done, both on the cross and in his resurrection. Like Peter, you can't take somebody else's word for it. You have to go look for yourself. To look among the living. I think the reason this account focuses on aftermath is to bring the question, where have we looked for Jesus? And if we've looked for him just as a moral teacher, if we've looked for him as a martyr of history, or if we've looked for him as a kind of template for human life, or a sort of tragic life coach, if we've looked for him as one option among many for connecting with God, we've looked for Jesus among the dead, because he's just not there, and we'll never find him. But if with Peter, we go looking for ourselves among the living, experience and words can bond together in a way that make this report a living reality that changes everything. I'm going to ask our band to return, if they would, for just a moment. And at this point in our Sunday event, what we'd like to do is take a few moments.